Okay, this is 2010 number 3 FRQ about foreign exchange and balance of payments. Remember to set it up just as you see it in the question. So got some extra space down here to work with so you can see both the question and the answer at the same time. So the U.S. firm sells $10 million worth of goods to a firm in Argentina where the currency is the peso. So immediately, if the United States sells it to it, I'm going to think, where's the money going? So the money is going from Argentina to the United States. Okay, so how will the transaction above affect Argentina's aggregate demand and explain? So write a 3 and an A. So if the United States is selling stuff to Argentina, then Argentina is going to be they're going to be buying stuff, right? So now if they're buying stuff, we've got to think about net exports. So for Argentina, I'm going to think net exports is equal to X minus M. And I can either think that they become the importers or their exports are going to go down. Well, if I look at it this way, if their imports are going up, that's a negative. So that's going to make net exports a negative or decrease. And since net exports are a component of aggregate demand, remember sig X equals AD. So if one side is going down of sig X, that means aggregate demand is going to go down. So it says, how will it affect their aggregate demand and explain? Well, you get a point for stating that Argentina's aggregate demand will fall because the purchase results in increased imports or decreased net exports. So either way, if you show the aggregate demand is decreasing and explain it, you're going to get 2 points out of that part right there. Okay. Now, for part B, remember you can use the symbols. They're kind of a universal language. If you're not comfortable with that, you can write it out a little bit more. But either way, make sure you get those 2 points in there by saying that their aggregate demand is going to decrease. So that's the AD with the down arrow. And then your explanation is that net exports are a component of aggregate demand. All right, now for part B, it asks us, assume the current account balance with Argentina is 0. How will the transaction above affect the U.S. current account balance? And explain. Anytime you see command words, show, graph, illustrate, explain, they're all going to lead to points on an FRQ. So on part B, the current account balance in the United States is going to go into surplus. Balance is going to surplus or increase. Okay, now it's going to do that the reason for that, or your explanation, remember, because I say explain, let me zoom in a little bit for you. Current account balance, surplus or increase, because exports are a credit to the U.S. current account. Okay, remember, goods and services are a part of the current account. There's those net exports, goods and services, all those things. So remember, the money is coming in, so it's a surplus to our account. Now, part C, using a correctly labeled graph of foreign exchange market for the U.S. dollar, show how a decrease in the U.S. financial investment in Argentina affects each of the following. So when it says show right here, that's how you're going to answer these two parts. Show the supply of the U.S. dollar and the value of the U.S. dollar relative to the peso on your graph. So now for part C, let me zoom out a little bit so you can see that a little bit more. Okay. So now for part C, I'm going to draw my graph. Remember, everything's supply and demand, just depends on the labels. So supply and demand, they asked in the question for the United States dollar. So I know I'm going to put the dollar sign up here, and then whatever currency you're working in is the denominator of every label on the graph. So now that means I'm going to have the dollar under the peso, and our exchange rate is right there at equilibrium. So the quantity is where those two meet, and remember you have the quantity of the U.S. dollar right there. Now the question says, show how the decrease in U.S. financial investment in Argentina affects the following. So we had all this money come in from Argentina, but we're not going to invest in Argentina's banks or their financial assets. So when that means that we're going to use our own money. Okay, so we're either going to demand our dollars once they hit our banks, because basically all the financial capital has flowed into the United States because of those exports to Argentina. So that is going to decrease the supply of the U.S. dollar, and we'll show a leftward shift right there. Now what's going to happen? The exchange rate is going to increase, or the peso divided by the U.S. dollar, and we'll see that the quantity supplied is going to decrease as well. So the answer key would actually be a graph that looks like this. Okay, and so as long as you label quantity of dollars, peso, over the US dollar, that's going to show that exchange rate right there, either way you look at it. Okay, and you can still get credit for it right there. So we're going to get plus 2 points for showing on our graph these two things in the question. Okay, now you get a point for your graph and a point for your leftward shift. Now on to part D. Suppose the inflation rate is 3% in the US and 5% in Argentina. So I would like to write that down. 3% in the US, 5% in Argentina. So if I'm thinking about these two things right here, immediately these are inflation rates. So where is it cheaper to shop? The US is going to be cheaper. So if I'm thinking that's going to be cheaper, what will happen to the value of the peso relative to the US dollar as a result of the difference in inflation rates? And of course, there's that magic word explain, and that gets you a point as well. So the value of the peso, if I'm in Argentina and I want to buy things from the United States, what's going to happen to my peso? I'm going to put it back in the supply, aren't I? So the supply of the peso is going to go up. And if there's more of it, what does the value do? It's going to depreciate. Because if there's more of it, that means no one wants it. So that means they're going to need US dollars. So remember, you put your pesos back in the supply, then you demand dollars. So you're going to state that the peso will depreciate against the dollar, so that's a point. And you can write this out and word it a little bit better than that. Then you get a point for explaining the higher inflation rate in Argentina makes US goods less expensive than Argentina. So US goods are less expensive. So that's why people are going to buy those. And then you get 2 points for explaining both of those things. Let me zoom out so you can see the whole answer key and questions a little bit clearer. And I hope that helps solving that one.